3, 2. Welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. I'm Stacy Schmidt. A lot, at the time of this recording, a lot is happening. We still don't know who the president of the United States is going to be. We still don't know who is going to be perhaps a congressman, a senator around the country. So we have a lot to talk about on this edition of Politics 2020. And I'd like to introduce now our panelists, if I can. And they are joining us is former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett served as a state attorney general and then U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and he now teaches law at Duquesne University. On the other side of the table, we find Jim Byrne. Jim is the former party chairman for the Democratic Party in the state of Pennsylvania. He also served as county council chairman in Allegheny Council and also as mayor of Millvale. On the other side of the table, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith's political background goes back to the Reagan campaign of 1980. He also served as the state director for former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum and served on Santorum's presidential campaign of 2012. Keith now has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. Going back to the Democratic side of the table, we find Amanda Green Hawkins. Amanda served as national committee woman representing Pennsylvania to the Democratic Party. Amanda also served as Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union that's based here in Pittsburgh. And we turn now to the great philosopher of around the table, Joe Mystic. Joe's name is familiar in Democratic politics, especially around the state. He has served several roles in the city of government, in the city of Pittsburgh government, including deputy mayor. Joe teaches law now at Duquesne University, and you can read his weekly column in the Trib. All right, first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, let's get your reaction to what happened on Tuesday night and perhaps what we still don't know as far as regards to Tuesday night. And Governor Corbett, I would like to start with you.
Can I pass? No. Who knows what's happening? It's a raucous event all across the country. We're down to what, 5 to 6, 7 states. We see a difference in an election based upon mail-in ballots or same-day voting at the polling places. The result still unknown. It looks like it's leaning towards the vice president. But I think everything I hear, there are some states that are still up in the air. This is 2 days later. And if it's taught us anything, it's to have patience, not to declare victory ahead of time. And it's not just the president that has declared victory ahead of time. It's some other candidates that have done that. And you're still waiting for the numbers to at least be close to finalized. And then finally, I think there's frustration, particularly on my side of the aisle, with the delay in counting the mail-in votes, and not necessarily saying a delay, but not reporting, well, how many more do you have to go? And just leaving it at a percentage of 25% to be counted for over 24 hours. That lack of information, I think, will cause some concern afterwards and some review as to we need to report this better and more smoothly than what's been occurring. And I'm not just talking about Pennsylvania, I'm talking across the country.
I'd like to get into the mail-in ballots separately in just a moment, so we'll get back to that in a second here. Amanda, your thoughts?
Well, we saw record turnout. So we see people wanting to be heard. We saw participation up all across the country, particularly here in Pennsylvania, which is great that we have people participating in our democracy. And the fact that we don't know who won yet, I think, is a testament to the enthusiasm surrounding all of this, and also the workload that it generates for our counties in our state, because all of these ballots have to be counted. Every vote has to count. And ironically, Republicans didn't want us to start counting early, and they don't want us to count after Tuesday either. So what do they want us to do? What is the solution? We have to take the time to make sure that all of these votes get counted. And I think that once all of them get counted, it will weigh in favor of Vice President Biden and Senator Harris.
All right, thank you. Joe Mystic, your thoughts?
I think it was a celebration of our democracy, of our republic. A lot of the fears we had were not realized in terms of disruption at the polls. A massive, massive undertaking, perhaps the greatest turnout ever. Certainly in Pennsylvania, huge turnout. Along with a turnout of that size comes some natural problems. but they're mostly administrative management problems. They've been dealt with. I like the protests. They were mostly peaceful protests. Some people are getting a little rambunctious now, but it's all part of this process. It's great to be an American. Great to see something like this happen. Count every vote. That's what it's about. Count every vote.
Jim Byrne, I'm going to bring you in next. It seems like a lot of Democrats have smiles on their faces right now.
They do, and what a difference from the looks on our faces on Tuesday night. We needed to emphasize more leading up to Tuesday that this was sort of an inverted type of a cycle due to the absentee ballots and the mailing in of the ballots. That we should have talked more, I think, about the fact that the GOP was relying on a 2-minute offense in the fourth quarter. Donald Trump dissuaded his supporters, since July, to refrain from using mail-in ballots. He called them a fraud. He called them a sham. He said, don't do it. I don't want you to do it. I want you to show up on election day. Much to the chagrin of many Republican consultants, Republican chairs, Republican candidates who thought that was a great opportunity, especially in COVID, to be utilized to be competitive. Ironically, it's coming back to bite him because these states, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, had a lot of Democrats doing their mail-ins, Republicans showing up on election day. And they're the 5 states. And we talked about this maybe 3 or 4 sessions ago. Donald Trump needed to win all of the 5 toss-ups. 2 of them are still left, North Carolina and Arizona. NC probably goes to Trump. Arizona looks like it's going to go to Biden. He needed to get all 5 and then flip some of the leaning blues. The only leaning blue left for him is Pennsylvania. He's down, as we tape, 160,000. We joked about this Tuesday night. Philadelphia hasn't dropped the payload yet. He's performing out there at 80%. Bob Casey was on TV this morning. I went around Pennsylvania with Bob Casey during the 67 county tour in 2012, and he knows that map. He knows the demographics. He predicts that when that payload gets dropped in Philly, that Biden will be up by 20,000. So as we've talked about before and we're talking about today, there is a whole new horizon now for how we process votes and how we elect candidates with the option of the mail-in scenario. Republicans failed to utilize it, and that is on the shoulders of Donald Trump.
All right, Keith, I saved you for last. Go ahead.
Lucky me.
Yes.
No matter how you sliced it, based upon the polling that we saw nationally for months, the GOP had a remarkably good night. We held the Senate. Looks like as of this taping, we are going to gain 7 votes in the House, and we're still trying to figure out who the President of the United States is. But that's somewhat of a concern. We talked about an election night. I have to touch on it now. The trust that American people have in polling has to have completely evaporated. The fact that a highly respected newspaper like the Washington Post a week before the election said that the vice president was ahead 17 points in Wisconsin, and now we see an outcome of less than 1% is irresponsible. So it's interesting. I mean, is there meat on the bone for the president? There's some meat on the bone. I mean, the fact is he has to hold North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania. If he holds those 3, he's at 267. And then through challenges of the mail-in ballots, he'd either have to flip Michigan or Wisconsin or outright win in Arizona or Nevada. And the Arizona and Nevada stories are interesting to me. I mean, Nevada, I mean, it's hard to believe that that county is as slow as it is, but it's an 8,000 vote margin. The reasons the network pulled that back was when they analyzed Las Vegas. They were thinking that Las Vegas would overwhelmingly go for the challenger. But now, because it is an economy that relies on hospitality and entertainment and whatnot, and we're very frustrated with the mandated closings, there could be some sentiment for the president there. And Arizona might even be more interesting than Nevada, because there's 2 things they're looking at in Arizona. Number one, ABC pulled back the declaration on Arizona because they found out that none of the early vote was counted. Don't confuse early voting with mail-in voting. Early voting means you get in a car and you show up at a poll somewhere, you stand in line and you vote. That vote traditionally across the country has gone for Republicans in an overwhelming fashion. The second thing is the Sharpie issue. if you don't believe me, Google it. Arizona Sharpie. Apparently, a number of counties were handing out Sharpies to the voters, and when they used the Sharpie to vote, it did not count the votes, and it did not imprint like a pen or a pencil would imprint. So they're going back, having to pull those out and have to count them by hand. So again, it's far from over, but my assessment, based on what was lining up based on the polling, a blowout by the vice president, the former vice president, never came to pass.
I want to ask you this question and then get a quick response from everybody else. You brought up polling, and then the Washington Post poll for Wisconsin that had the former vice president up by 17. Do you really think that influences people, these polls, as to whether they go and vote, Keith?
Well, you're back to me. Well, there is a concern when the number is that big. I mean, there has to be a lot of people, unfortunately, as much as we all talk about how important the down ticket offices are to you and your family, most people show up on election day because of the presidential vote. So if it dissuaded anybody because they thought the election was over on either side, because the Democrats could feel, hey, we have this one, I'm not going to waste my time, or the Republicans, there's no chance. But there has to be a certain responsibility in polling. There's a sense that for people that there is some kind of official side of polling, or the government mandates polling. There's different samplings in every poll. People use different models, and that's a real concern. And at this point, the conversations that I've had in the last 48 hours are people saying, I'll never believe a poll again.
How's polling even still a thing after this last election?
Sure.
These folks should look for they should get on with their life's work, as Chuck Bull used to say. And the polls we deal with are principally entertainment polls. They're for us to kick around, people like us across the land in programs like this, editorial writers, news writers. It gives them some fodder that they can cite. The truth is, the greatest violations in this race by pollsters probably came with the internal polls. There are campaigns spending real money for real guidance, and they appear to have been off the mark too. And those are the polls that you would think were closer and certainly more accurate, could be relied upon. But that wasn't the case either. It's time to change professions.
Yeah,
right.
And I think a lot of the down ballot candidates look at the national polling numbers and hope to ride the coattails of the leading candidate. But here in Pennsylvania, Stacy, I think we also have to talk about the fact that our row offices, those races are really tight. We don't know what's going to happen with some of them yet. And then there have been some other tighter races with in the House, the state House, the state Senate. There are going to be some changes there. So it looks like maybe we have people splitting tickets, or maybe some drastic undervotes going on, because the outcomes aren't what you would expect from what's going on at the top.
You bring up a very good point. I'm going to bring in Jim Byrne on this one. There was a compromise made by Republicans in the legislature with Democrats in the legislature. Republicans said, if you do away with the straight party ticket ballot, we'll go with mail-in balloting. As Amanda just brought up, we have perhaps the Vice President of the United States, former Vice President, winning Pennsylvania. We don't know for sure yet. Mr. Trump is still in the lead. But if he does take Pennsylvania, we have these row offices that may be going on the Republican side. So did this work by getting rid of the straight party ticket?
I certainly think that as we study exit polling and study data, that there can be no doubt that the compromise reached to get rid of the pull the lever played a role in what we're seeing. It's another death knell to the old machine style of politics, where the ward chairs and the party bosses could come out and say, just go pull the lever because we said so. Those are our people. Those are our candidates. They're ours. We had our conversation in the spring. Get out there and just pull the lever and go home. It's over. It was starting to wane anyway, but now that pretty much puts a nail in it. So yes, Stacy, I do think that the inability for party bosses on both sides to say just pull the lever is a factor in why we're seeing the row offices not going as strong as Mr. Biden apparently appears to be going. And it speaks also to what Keith and the rest of us have been saying about these these inaccurate polls. We were seeing Josh Shapiro and Joe Torcella allegedly running away with these statewide row offices. Well, that didn't pan out. We saw from these polls, and we've touched on it, that the anomaly of the surge for Trump in Western Pennsylvania would never be repeated. Well, good luck with that one as well. But conversely, we were kind of joking Tuesday night about Georgia, saying, whoever told Joe Biden to go to Georgia? What kind of polls were they? Well, those weren't necessarily that off base. There's 50,000 votes left to be counted down there in areas where Mr. Biden has been performing at about 70%. So if that metric holds, he's down Biden by 18,000. 70% in Georgia gives him 35,000 in that victory of 17. Let's keep an eye on Georgia in the next couple hours. That's 16 electoral votes. That gets him to 269.
You know, as a party stalwart, I like the single lever. We all did as advocates for our own parties. But the truth is, it was time for it to go. Both parties now have more pressure at the top to field quality candidates down the ballot. And because people are going to get down that ballot and they're going to pick and choose between the individuals who are running, they aren't going to have the option of just pulling one lever. I think that's good for the democracy. It's good for America.
We have one of our analysts who indeed ran for row office, and that would be for State Attorney General, Governor Corbett. Your thoughts on this?
Well, first off, let me go back to how the polls affect a campaign.
All right.
And how it affects a campaign when the general public sees that somebody's up 7, 8, 9 points. The opponent, who's down 7, 8, 9 points, has a much harder time raising money, has a discouraged support team or voters out there. They're not going to win. I guarantee you there were a lot of people probably saying Heather Heidelbaugh doesn't have a chance of beating Josh Shapiro. It's much closer than anybody ever could have anticipated. A lot of that had to do with polls and other factors. And it does affect you in a statewide office. There was a compromise. I think Jim mentioned it earlier. It was a compromise between the Senate and the House, between the Republicans and the Democrats. Get rid of the single lever, but also allow mail-in voting. Each one saw it as a benefit. I think each one did receive a benefit, and each one sometimes regrets it. Isn't that the definition of a compromise? So I think it was a good compromise. Now, everybody needs to take and learn the lessons of that for conducting campaigns in the future. How are they going to get their message out? I guarantee you, Republican National Committee, Republican State Committee ought to be figuring out how they're going to do for the midterms mail-in voting, because people are going to like that convenience in the long run. But they still need their ground game. And I think the Democrats are going to say, we still need a ground game also. And they didn't have much of a ground game this year because they relied, and looks justifiably, on the mail-in voting. Keep in mind, though, I think it's going to be different this year than, God help us, 2 years from now, because hopefully we won't have COVID then as we did now. And that was a precipitator to the heavy use of mail-in voting.
All right. You brought up mail-in voting.
Stacy,
Go ahead.
Stacy, can we stay on the election results just for one more minute here?
Sure.
Can I comment on something else? There's a storyline for the viewers that I think they have to understand relative to the balance of power and what happened in the United States Senate. For all intents and purposes, it does appear that by the narrowest of margins, the Republicans will retain the United States Senate, thus allowing, even if the outcome is a change of government at the top, they will be able to have some checks and balances with Mr. Biden by holding the Senate. Fast forward to 2 years from now, it'll be a midterm for the Biden if he does win, and likely they will gain seats because next cycle there are more Democrats defending seats than Republicans, added to the fact that midterm their size of their plurality, their majority will grow in 2022, thus assuring a balance of power or some balance in Congress throughout Mr. Biden's term. The inverse is we hold the narrowest of margins. If Trump ends up pulling off this electoral college victory, I can assure you that in 2 years, in a second term, midterm, we will lose the Senate handily. So there is almost a trade-off here on the top of the ticket for where the United States Senate is going to go in 2022.
Interesting. I don't think we'd have much argument on how that works on the midterm elections. You're
I mean,
right.
that just confirms what I've always thought. I think there are many Republican senators who are rooting for Biden.
To protect their own tails.
Yeah, exactly. Save their own hide. You might be right on that one, Joe. All right, let's get to the mail-in balloting thing. Legal challenges have already been filed. There are going to probably be more, perhaps a possibility of making it all the way to the United States Supreme Court as far as the way Pennsylvania goes. One of the main issues, the changes made by state officials in the weeks and days prior to the election, especially in regards to the mail-in ballots. So here's the question. Should we have undertaken such a major reliance on mail-in balloting without hard set rules like we have for in-person voting? Joe, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, there are lessons to be learned here, clearly. We learned during this election that you can carry an AR-15 into the voting booth, but a police officer has to stay 100 feet away from the polling place. A lot of us didn't look at that until this past election. There are lessons to be learned on mail-in voting. There's usually not enough time. The challenge procedures are a little bit unclear, but we are learning. We learn every election. There's some lessons at the end of every election. This will be no different. I think that we need to get our legislature to immediately convene and see what we can do better. This late arrival of ballots that the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has permitted is something else to be looked at. We allow military ballots to be counted, even though they come in after Election Day, because the mail service is unreliable. Well, guess what? The mail service is just as unreliable for the rest of us as it is for people living abroad. You can mail a letter from Europe and it might get here sooner than it will from the other side of town. I don't understand the mysteries of that, but clearly that's what happens. So we need to build that kind of ability in there for all votes to be counted. The goal here should be, how do we count all of the votes, all the legitimate votes? That's what it should be.
Amanda.
I think the first question is, how is it that we make sure everybody votes? And in the middle of a pandemic like we have, the state had to come up with a method so that everyone who's eligible can cast a ballot. And now how do we count those votes? And it's important to remember that even though this is something that we may have had to put together in a quick way, things arise, problems arise, and the question always has to be, first and foremost, how do we make sure this person votes? How do we make sure people vote? And then you address those issues as they arise and make sure that they can cast their ballots. That always has to be the priority, I think. How do we make sure people vote, no matter what the circumstances?
All right. Jim Byrne.
Yes, I think the professor and Amanda touched on it. We had a cost-benefit analysis going here. We need to make some changes. We need to do them expeditiously. We do not have the luxury of time, perhaps, to really vet this through proposed legislation, amendment, and debate. So they erred on the side they thought they needed to err on. I believe they did so correctly. Now, of course, there will certainly be the invitation of a lawsuit or lawsuits because of those type of decisions that were made in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not the only state where Donald Trump is attempting to file lawsuits. He's threatening or has filed in many or some of the other states that are still up for grabs. You're hearing about challenges in Wisconsin or Michigan or Arizona or Nevada, in Pennsylvania. But here's the paradox of what he has created for himself, which he will have to explain in court if and when he gets there. In some states where he is losing, Arizona, Nevada, the lawsuits, but where he appears to be gaining ground, what do the lawsuits say? Keep counting, keep counting, keep counting. But then you go to Pennsylvania, where Mr. Biden is catching him. What do the lawsuits say? Stop counting, stop counting, stop counting. So he's speaking with a forked tongue right now. The only component of the Pennsylvania lawsuit that may have some vetting that needs to be done is that component that talks about the ballots that were marked by Election Day and to be received by the end of this week. The Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, left a little bit of a window, Justice Alito, in that regard. Based on what we're seeing from the modeling, however, even if he were to file a challenge on that specific issue, it appears as if, and we'll see what happens, that the margins may make those numbers or that specific issue inconsequential to the Pennsylvania total tallies.
You just made history here, the lead story. You said that a politician spoke with a forked tongue. I never would have believed that before.
Careful,
I've heard that.
careful.
Governor?
So as a politician, let me say this. We're in a period of time in our history that everybody wants instant information and they want to know what happened right away. They're sitting, they're watching CNN, Fox, everything. Give us more information, give us more information. I don't know how we do this, but we got to dampen that expectation that they're going to get the results that night. Keep in mind, we had 5 different time zones that we're reporting from. A little hard to do that, but everybody wants to know who won the minute the polls close. And I think that's a problem, that when they come to the mail-in votes, do they have them arrive earlier? Do you change the dates for that? Or do you just tell everybody the election's not over until the Friday after the Tuesday? No votes can come in after Tuesday to be counted, but we'll say the election's Friday. We got to change expectations. Is that going to happen? I don't think so.
Keith?
Well, I mean, I see that Michigan and Wisconsin, they're going to go to a recount because it's less than 1%. But the real challenge there is going to be the mail-in ballots, the legal arguments. How and when were the ballots accepted? How were they counted? And hard to believe that 20 years later, after we all did a whole generation of Florida jokes, Florida's the model? I mean, Florida, who had a record number of mail-in ballots, somehow found a way to get the count in efficiently on election night. And places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and North Carolina and others, it stalled at 70%, 75, 80, 85%. And it was unsettling to a lot of people. It's unsettling to me now. You know, so the concern is there has to be more transparency. We should be allowed to know how many ballots are left and when they're going to be counted and why they're not being counted as efficiently as the Sunshine State did on November 3rd.
You know, maybe I've been in too many close elections, but I'm accustomed to waiting until the results are certified. You don't know who the winner is until that happens. And even then it can be challenged, but that's the nature of this business. The media, the media likes to get it fast, which isn't always getting it right. We have to get it right. This is a very important election. The future of the nation turns on it. We have to take our time and make sure every ballot is counted. We'll withstand these objections, whether they're decided one way or the other. We'll have to deal with them. I think it's important that the Supreme Court stay out of this election, the election itself. If they want to address the peculiarities of this jurisdiction or that, so be it. But this is the people's election. This doesn't belong to a court, especially one that's been appointed and is occupied by a bunch of people who've never stood for an election before the people.
Well, that's
Stacy,
go ahead.
Can I just add one quick scenario? My first election for Attorney General, people went to bed thinking that Jim Eisenhower won. We never conceded that race. We got up the next morning. I actually won by 100,000 votes because everything had to come in. 2 months, 3 months later, we get a note from the Department of State that, well, you actually won by 110,000 votes because there was a mathematical error coming out of one of the counties and they had the numbers wrong and we corrected it. So you won by 110,000 votes. So you understand people make mistakes. There are mistakes being made. We're never going to eliminate mistakes being made completely. But I think the fear that people have is there's skullduggery going on.
Yeah.
And I really haven't seen any skullduggery.
We only have a little bit of time left, so I want to make one question or one comment. First, back to you, Joe. You're talking about patience. You're a fan of the opera, so you're accustomed to waiting for that certain person to come on stage and sing before you call it the night. Quickly, if we can go around the table, should there be a national standard for mail-in ballots? Governor, start with you.
You know what? Should there be a national standard? Yes, it takes a lot of work, but if you're using the US mails, why wouldn't you have a national standard that they have to live by and the states have to meet? But there's so many different rules about when the ballots are going to be printed and so forth in the 50 different states. That's going to be something that Congress is going to have to resolve. And I don't see Congress resolving it.
We have 51 separate elections. We don't have a national election. And our strength is that we have 51 separate state elections, including the District of Columbia. I think messing with the state's rights to run these elections as they see fit is very, very dangerous.
Keith,
It would be helpful, but it's never going to happen. The states would never approve such a measure.
all right, Jim,
I agree with my colleagues. I mean, the pretty clear on this, precedent's pretty clear on this, in the enormity of the task, as the governor said, to create something like that. It's insurmountable. We need to try to be consistent within the states as best we can, exchange information, et cetera, but it's up to the states.
all right, Amanda, you've got the last word today.
I think that the states have to handle it. The states know what's going on in their own backyards, and only they know what's going to be best for them and their people. Let the states do it.
All right, I want to thank all of you for joining us again today on Around the Table. And I will say that hopefully we'll be back again next week. And by that time, hopefully, we will know who won what in the United States of America. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
See you
Stacy.
next week.
You're right.
Thank
Have a
you.
great week.